Well, first of all, I would just like to say good morning and thank everybody for being here today. We have some good news here to share, and obviously some comments, and then as has been articulated, the statistical analysis. So we see lots of evidence this year that our service is gaining ground against the violence and disorder that have taken hold of our communities over the past several years. In fact, our overall crime severity is the lowest rate we've seen now in 10 years. And our overall crime rate has dropped 2.5% in 24, reaching a level that we have not seen since 2014. We have been relentless, as has been said before, in pursuing safety from the lenses of both empathy and accountability, and our overall crime rate is down about 25% from its peak in 2018, 2019, reaching the lowest level that we've seen in 10 years. What we see is not an accident, and I want to be very clear. It's the benefit of some hard-won stability, including financial stability of our service, mixed with smart policing within the organization that is becoming increasingly nimble in responding to what we see on the ground. Honestly, without the detour that was caused by the defund movement, I believe we should have even been further along, to be quite honest. It's also been part of better resource planning that today has higher levels of frontline officers on the street than any time in our history, and has a service showing good momentum across so many measures, including the wellness, seen this week by our placement among Alberta's top 85 employers. We don't take that lightly. If we don't have healthy people and a good place to work, it's hard to get the results that we're just seeing. Better resource levels and planning allow us to achieve higher levels of proactive work by our officers, a factor as contributing to the overall increase in calls for service that we see at 5.1%. More proactive policing emerging from our community safety teams is producing more discernible differences in our ability to be more responsive and to address challenges before they escalate into larger issues. Major trends like spikes in violent crime and gun violence were met with a fast stand-up of a new Guns and Gangs team, and in 2024, we are reporting a 47% decrease in shootings this year, year over year. The data shows us this. When we look at officer-generated calls, they have increased by 4.6% over 2019. It's tempting, especially in last week as a chief, to reflect on the wins in these numbers, and let me be clear, there are some clear hard-earned wins despite the distractions, but I also want to be clear there's still much work to be done. For example, in understanding that our approach has been the right one in so many areas, from standing up the HSOC teams, which we started calling for in 2020, to our high-risk encampment response, to our lobbying for the navigation center put in place, these solutions have absolutely been on point. I want to give credit to our leaders and teams across our organization who did the work, and for their tenacious in ensuring we were applying the right solutions to the issues we see. But we also know the work isn't done. We know that because it's Edmontonians are telling us, as good as our numbers may be, the reality on the ground and that some of the mindset has not yet shifted. And the community does not have that sense of safety back that we all strive for. Much more work needs to be done, but we have considerable momentum, and we must celebrate and share this story. And I appreciate you all being here today to do that. In our day-to-day work, in our stakeholder outreach, and in the community-based research we do, people are not yet feeling the shifts we see. They tell us that their own perceptions of safety are tied as much to the disorder they see as the actual crime they experience and witness. And frankly, they are worried on what they see downtown or on transit reflects the new reality. And this sets up perhaps the biggest challenge that we know that we will continue to confront in the coming months. Personally, I know this is a challenge. I will take with me into my new workplace as I begin to look through a new lens in the coming months and years. As AACP has stated and EPS agrees, the Compassionate Intervention Act can help multiply success. The key challenge ahead in 2025 is to combat the disorder and the issues that impact people's feelings of safety. The disorder on the streets that continue to keep people off transit or from coming back to work in the downtown. These, as we've said many times, are not just policing issues, but they are urgent issues. Because our failure to address the toll that these issues are having on the psyche of our city is simply not acceptable. Here is what we know from the policing side of things. We know that our presence matters. People feel safer when they see police in their communities. They know that police presence on transit in their communities deter crime, solves crimes and disorder, and it increases perceptions of safety. All of the input we have from the public says exactly this. We know from our own experience that tackling disorder helps to mitigate issues before they become bigger problems, and that this is a major part of the overall safety equation and the reason why our partner-based teams are so successful. It's why we are standing up our community safety teams at EPS, so we can be nimble and more proactive in responding to the reality on the streets and the shifts that occur between neighborhoods. And I know this work will be ongoing long after my departure. But it's also why it's not just a police issue, it's why the city's public spaces bylaw, which will be debated in coming weeks, is so important. Because people want their spaces back, and we have to find the right balance to ensure this is done. Empathy and accountability works, it's worked, and we must have and continue to have the tools to do this work in a fair manner. I wish them luck in these deliberations. I do know that all people want this sense of safety back. And it's why on a personal level, I know that my work on these files will be carried into my new role, and I look forward to engaging with the government on the province's role in these discussions. But I don't want to take away from the place we are at today and the progress that we are making. I want to express my gratitude to the people at EPS for their hard work, their ability to respond quickly to changing conditions, and to work with the partners and the communities. When I started this job, it's kind of funny looking at it, I said we were going to reduce our crime by 20%, and people thought I was crazy. We had second or third highest of a large city in the country. We are now at 25% reduction, and as I mentioned, I know the EPS team will move us there even further. And again, if we didn't have the distractions in the middle where the bump where it went up, perhaps we would even be a lot further now. Our people and their tireless efforts, even when the work is being thankless, they are one of the biggest reasons we see the crime trending in the right direction. We are making a difference, and I am so proud, very proud of this organization and all the work it reflects. Just a final note, it's all these things now that I think I'm reflecting on. When I started, I asked what I believe, what we had to be able to answer from the public, and there were 3 questions, and I'll repeat them as I get closer to my last day. Am I safe is the number 1. Clearly things are getting better, and they're improving all the time. And those improvements have actions that have led us in those directions. Second question, can I trust you? Policing still remains one of the most trusted institutions in Canada. Survey from StatsCan, our own research show us this, but it's sometimes we take it for granted. And it's also something that we have to ensure that we continue on this path with empathy and accountability to do the right thing at the right time, regardless of public opinion. Finally, the third question is, do police know what they are doing? Clearly, the evidence that we show today has proven we've initiated the right projects, moved resources in the right directions to produce the results you are about to see, and I'm confident that our Edmonton Police Service is only going to get better and better. And to that end, I want to get Superintendent Derek McIntyre up here to walk you through these results in much more detail. And then we'll get to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning, everyone. So the analysis that I'm going to present to you today, keep in mind, is at a very high kind of corporate enterprise level across the city and across the service. If you do have any more detailed analytical questions, you can submit them into corporate comms, and we will do our very best to turn those more detailed questions around today so that we can meet your deadlines. So what we're going to see first is we're going to start with our calls for service. So compared to 2023, we saw an increase of 5.1% in calls for service, which is the highest track calls for service that we've had since 2019. We used to hold 2019 as our threshold or our benchmark for what was our highest year of calls for service. We're now 195,000 calls for service in 2024. Let me break that down for you a little bit. That is not 195,000 times the public called the police service with a issue or complaint. What that is we break our calls for service into two categories. The first category, which is the line you're seeing at the top, is when the public does call us. So that's what we call public-generated calls for service. And the line that you're seeing on the bottom is member-generated calls for service. So member-generated calls for service is when a member is proactive in their duties. They are in a place that they have been deployed to. And in our organization, we use a lot of data and evidence-based practices to deploy our proactive resources. And that member comes across an incident or an issue that they address, and they generate a call for service themselves. So if you look at last year, 2024, we actually saw a decrease in the amount of times the public is calling the police and an increase in the number of times our members are intervening in things proactively. And to give a broader example of that, in what spaces are we seeing that punctuated the greatest? Where we're seeing it punctuated the greatest is on transit. Our investment, which was a co-investment from the Government of Alberta, and the creation of our transit safety teams and deploying them on transit across all the lines, have seen a significant increase in the number of events that our transit officers are going to, and that's the top graph. The result of that is what you're seeing in the bottom graph, which is a significant decrease in the amount of crime severity measured on transit. So when you ask yourself, okay, what are the things going on transit that your members are dealing with? This is what it brings it to. About 83% of the total dispatch calls for service on transit are captured in these 10 behaviors, or we call them occurrences or incident types. Almost half of their work on transit is an arrest. For absolute clarity, the incident type of arrest is not we respond to something on transit and end up arresting the person. The category of arrest is tied directly to a warrant execution in relation to a matter that someone has not dealt with and has gone to an arrest warrant, and our members are having an interaction with them, a lawful interaction, their identity is gathered. They run that across the national database called CPIC, and it shows that this person has an outstanding warrant. What this demonstrates is the benefit of having proactivity on transit, and the work that they're doing does lead to an arrest, but it also removes someone with a criminal background, criminal history, and outstanding criminal matters from the transit system, which overall makes it safer. And there are, as you can see through the categories, a mix of some criminal events and a mix of some disorder events, and these are the matters that our transit officers are attending to in a very proactive way. So when we talk about criminal incidents, citywide, between 2023 and 2024, we had a decrease in overall criminal incidents. We categorize our criminal incidents into two different categories, one being violence and one being everything that is in violence. And we saw an increase of 1.8% in violent incidents. I'll draw your attention to the difference between 2023 and 2024 and 2022 and 2023. So 2022 to 2023, we saw a single digit still, a 7% increase in violence in criminal incidents. We are bending that curve downward, where that increase is now 1.8%. So if that trends out over the next 2 years, we will start seeing negative numbers. So we are seeing the commencement of a downward trend in violence. Though year over year, it shows as a 1.8% increase. In contrast to previous years, we are starting to see that curve turn downward, which is a very positive circumstance that we get to find ourselves in. And this is all through the matters of how we are deploying smartly across the city, how we are using our resources in a reactive and a proactive manner, how we are letting our data drive where we place our people, at what times, in what concentrations. And that evidence-based approach is really having dividends. Next slide I'll give you too is this slide is in relation to weapons, the presence or use of weapons. As the chief mentioned, we've had a 47% reduction in shootings, which is one of the categories of firearms that we capture. There's a really interesting interplay between possession of a firearm, which is also included in this data, and the use of a firearm. So shootings have gone down 47%. What comes with that is we have been on an increasing level, been finding people in possession of firearms before they have had an opportunity to use it. So what our data shows is that though there is a citywide decrease of the use of weapons, there is an 11% decrease in relation to firearms weapons, which we're very proud of, and a lot of our proactive efforts. But that demonstrates that there is also, for there to be a 47% decrease in the use of a firearm and an overall decrease of 11%, something has to be going up. And what is going up is we are finding firearms through investigative means, through proactive means, before those firearms are able to be used. And this speaks volumes to everything we're doing in our guns and gang strategy, everything we are doing in relation to our proactive deployment. Many of the events that I showed in the previous slides around transit, it is not a surprising day for our transit officers to have an interaction with someone and they have a gun in their backpack on the train. These are the places that we are making gains. Another gain that we're seeing for the first time, so it's the dark black line, for the first time in many years, we have seen the use of caustic spray, commonly referred to as pepper spray, go down. There are many advocacy routes that we have taken in relation to bylaw generation around caustic spray, and we are starting to see the dividends of that because for the very first time, it is one of our most used weapons in the city. For the first time, we are starting to see a trend down, and that's very exciting for us in policing. Key focus for us through 2024 and now into 2025 is in relation to intimate partner violence or domestic violence. Though we've seen a 3.1% decrease year over year, we are as concerned as every other Edmontonian around the 10.7% increase we've seen as a trend over the last 5 years. So what that leads us to do is at the end of 2024, we commenced with some of our governmental partners in relation to developing a broad-based, intervention-based strategy around intimate partner violence. So the police are stepping in relation to many avenues focusing on offender management, victim advocacy, but there is a place for other partners at the table, and we are working with our governmental partners at the GOA in order to fill those spaces, because a lot of the things that focus and drive intimate partner violence and problems within issues and within domestic relationships is a role for someone in partnership with policing, but isn't a standalone role for policing alone, because there is a lot of intervention that needs to occur, a lot of things around mental health and addiction, a lot of things around food security, income security, and these are all spaces we are very active in, but we do not lead, but we do partner very strongly. So with our partnerships that we're developing around domestic violence in our domestic violence strategy, we really do seem to expect that this category of domestic violence data will have an even larger reduction through 2025 and into 2026. So let's talk about crime severity. Crime severity is every crime has a score. Every crime has a value. It's called the Uniform Crime Reporting. And what we've seen, and when you add all those things together, your city, and you take in factors like population, you get crime severity for your city. What we've seen is that we decreased by 3.5%, which is a consistent and continual decrease over the last few years. As I mentioned earlier, if violence is up a little bit by 1.8%, something has to be going down significantly for all of the crime severity to go down, 3.5%. And where we're seeing a lot of the really great reductions is in relation to our property crime and our drug crime. And as I mentioned, in relation to the possession and use of weapons. And this is a trend that we are very excited to continue to pursue. It's one that we are happy to report. And we have to take into consideration that these severity numbers and our crime rate numbers are all in relation to the census data available to us, which is last year's census data. These numbers and the crime rate numbers here are all based on population. We have way more Edmontonians now than we did in 2023 and 2024, though we have the total number of crimes and the total number of the severity of those crimes. When you factor in the population rate, which will show a growth for 2024, when we get the new number from StatCan, which comes out in the July release, is those will be factored in, and that crime severity and crime rate reductions, which we're seeing reductions in both, will be even larger than we're currently reporting today. And I, or the chief, will take any questions.
So, some of this stuff, you mentioned sort of population's influence on some of these figures. Specifically with the calls to service, like are people, what's going on there with that increase? You know, are people feeling more comfortable to report different things? Is it different stuff people are reporting? Is it just there's more of us, so more calls are coming in, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'll get Derek. I get it right.
It's everything, Jeremy. So we have more Edmontonians. We have higher faith and trust in the police service, as evidenced by some of the things that the chief had referenced in relation to our engagement with the community and getting feedback on that. Here's what I can tell you. The leading call type that the public is calling us about is not crime. About 80% of our dispatch calls for service in the reactive category, where the public calls us about it, is about disorder. In disorder in a way that they are feeling unsafe. So when we start talking about that 20% of our overall workload is crime, and that's where we're seeing some of the reductions, but we are seeing reductions in all calls for service, as I mentioned, that they have gone down in total. So people are calling us less about everything, but the ratio of what they do call us about and ask us to respond to are different categories of disorder and not necessarily in relation to victimization of crime.
And you mentioned sort of the increased focus on transit and the gang unit, drugs and gang unit. Can you just explain a bit more, because you also talked about sort of the stats versus the perception that people have about safety kind of thing. Can you just say a bit more about what those units are doing that is helping to reduce crime stats, crime severity, that kind of thing, and how that might eventually be reflected in the public's perception?
Yeah. No, I got it. I think the best, most succinct way to describe it is people feel safe when they see the police. People refer to bad experiences in relation to being a citizen in Edmonton at very specific locations. Our job then is to use our data and analyze it in a way to deploy police officers into those spaces at those times where we have the highest likelihood of preventing something from happening and people seeing the police there so they feel safe. That is 100% what drives our transit response, is we evaluate all of the calls for service on transit, proactive and reactive. Where people feel unsafe, we want to be in those spaces so that bad things don't happen to them and they get to see the police. Because one of the leading parts of research in policing around perceptions of safety is the one prevailing mechanism where people feel safer is when they see the police in the same spaces that they are in, and it makes them feel safe. Why? Because people typically don't commit crime right in front of the police, and they don't commit disorder right in front of the police. Our approach is where we're different in Edmonton, is when we are in those spaces, we are not criminalizing the things that brought us there. We do disorder analysis as well. We don't just focus on crime. When we are in a distressed community where there's a high level of disorder and we're there proactively, our approach is around empathy, compassion, connection to service. If there is accountability that needs to occur, we are the police. We do dole out accountability as well. We don't lead with it. We lead with what is going to get this person to a better outcome, not just today, but for tomorrow as well.
Just if I could add to that, Jeremy, just to Derek's point there is, you know, as we've said many times, demand reduction takes stuff out of the system. That's obviously some of the social disorder, some of the encampment work, connecting people to services. That takes away that vulnerability and adds to their crime rate. And at the same time, being relentless on those people pulling the triggers, all of those shootings, all of those firearms that are actually destroying people. And at the same time, working with our partners, and a couple good examples of that are the major fentanyl labs that have been taken out by alert. When you get all of those systems working simultaneously together, what you do is you draw the crime rate down. You get the people that need services out of the police services out of the justice system, and you use the justice system, what it was designed to do, to try to hold those that are destroying our communities accountable. So it goes hand in hand with some of the safer public spaces and stuff as well.
Last one from me, if I may, is just, you mentioned sort of some unhappiness with the interruption, I guess, from in this sort of progress that you perceive from the defund conversations and all that. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
No, I can. And like I say, when you go through a process like that, obviously, when you have a plan in place, you have to alter your plans, right? So, the fact of, because of some of that stuff in relation to budget decisions, we had to cancel a recruiting class. What we were going through is losing a lot of people. And now what we can say is that trend, now that we have that stability back, is all coming back, which allows you to get more people on the street. As I mentioned, we have more people. Our recruiting numbers, as I said before, in relation to applications, are higher than they've been in 10 years. People are wanting to get back and join the job. We're getting people back to work that have been off, obviously, in relation to the above the shoulder stress injuries, because we have a good reintegration program and we've invested in the wellness of our officers. So when you start to get away from those things and get back to the original plan, which we've seen the real results from 2019 to 2022 before it started to go up, now we're getting back to that, and the trends appear to be headed in the same way. And it's the right partnerships that we have. It's, things like the navigation center, the IT stuff, and the technology innovation. When you start trying to use those to leverage and make 1 + 1 = 3, good things happen, and that's what we're seeing. The thing that's not catching up with that, just to kind of reiterate with that, is making sure that we use this to get the good stories out to the public, that they get the hope back in the system and we get more people downtown, because it's not the same as it was 2 years ago. Does it need a lot more work? I think we all think it needs more work. But the distractions in relation to the other questions about stuff that isn't relevant to the conversation takes away from that. And I think that's why getting that stable base that we talked about going forward is going to lead to the continued momentum. Hey.
Hi, Madeline Smith from CBC. I'm not sure whether this question is best for the other officer, but can you please explain the sort of caveat that's on most of these charts about some investigations are still not concluded, so there are still some outstanding incidents maybe? I'm just trying to understand how reliable these numbers are in terms of a reflection of 2024 at this point.
So really great question, good pickup. So now we're talking about severity, is the ones you're talking about. So severity is calculated using a UCR value, so a severity value. Say the value of homicide is almost 8,000. And UCR is categorized and valued based on how many carceral days that, upon conviction, that offense would get. So if you calculate 25 years for murdering someone, it's almost 9,000 days. So that's the score. What we try to match up is at the end of 2024, we have homicide investigations that are still ongoing. We don't add the score to our severity until files are closed and classified, and that is how we report to StatCan. If you ever wonder how come the 2024 data from StatCan only comes out in July, is because they have to wait for all the police services across the country to finalize all of the cases that occurred in 2024 and attach that value to it. Then they also need the census data for the previous year in order to truly calculate severity. And the caveat on every one of those is exactly that. We have open files from 2024 that are severe, but they're not closed or classified yet. So we do a projection. We projection if they're open and the status that they're open in relation to an aggravated assault, we know the value of aggravated assault. So we add that as a proxy and a projection to that event and create a CSI value for the city. It all gets remedied through the July report from StatCan, because they bring in all of our actual classified and closed reports, the new census data, and that's when we get the big release that says this is what your true CSI was for 2024. We do report monthly to StatCan. That's why we're able to give you the data. And we typically run about 3 to 4 weeks is our confidence in our severity data goes up 4 weeks after when we're trying to measure it, because there's time to complete the file, classify the file, and disclose it to StatCan. So we wanted to give you year-end numbers, which I bet our severity rates are going to be even lower than what they are now. And we want to be able to give you a good product. Our data shop is one of the best in the country. We have some of the smartest minds in policing. They're in this room, actually. And everything that we're able to provide is unique to not only large police services. Not a lot of police services do their severity calculations every month, but we do, because it matters to us about how severe the crimes are that are going on in the city and what we can do to get ahead of it. That's a really great question.
So today, on January 30th, you're confident that the numbers are the numbers and they wouldn't be markedly different if we were looking at them in June of 2025?
Well, in June of 2025, so the number of events that have happened, we know have happened. It's just in what status they're in. So an aggravated assault is not just an aggravated assault. If that injury was brought on by a weapon, that's what's called a violation. That's another violation that gets added into the severity score of that occurrence. So when we only know how many other subcrimes have occurred in relation to the major crime when the investigation is done, because that's when all of the information is in. So, and then when you bring in the census data, the rate of growth of the population in Edmonton over the last few years is we will see severity even lower than what we're providing today.
And the overall crime rate number that you're talking about, that includes everything. That's violent crimes, that's nonviolent crimes.
Yes.
That's everything you investigate.
Yeah, crime rate is the number of crimes taken into consideration the population. It's by 100,000 of population.
Eric Bay, Global News.
Hey there.
Chief, it's our understanding that the Justice Minister has initiated a review of the policies and procedures of ACER and the Crown Prosecutor's Service. Is this something that EPS is in support of?
Well, I mean, anytime there's a review, if it can be better, it's no different than any other review. So yeah, we'll participate. We have a person that will be talking to them, and if we can make that process better, if there's some things that we can learn from it, we're not going to shy away from a review for sure.
Are you able to expand on what participation looks like?
Well, we don't know. We just got contact asking for a rep, so we've put forward one of our deputy chiefs to sit on that to answer any questions they need from us, and just, I'm assuming they'll look at the specific cases they mentioned and just, how that went through the system, timeliness and everything, and if there's any recommendations that can make it better, we're all for that.
It's not about any of the things that have been touched on so far. I just want to know what EPS involvement was. You kind of mentioned the public spaces bylaw earlier.
Yeah.
Can you talk about EPS involvement in crafting that, and why do you think the city needs this?
Well, I mean, Derek can probably talk to that because he's been involved more than I am, so I'll just start it. But I think pre-connection and pre-collaboration between the city and the police service should just be the norm in relation to trying to get the right tools to obviously reduce the rates. We do have a person that was sitting on there. Do you want to comment further on just how we participated, because he was there?
The beauty of the public spaces bylaw is that it's an omnibus bylaw where 4 bylaws were crafted into one major bylaw. Because when you talk about transit spaces, highways, parks, and different rules for all of them, and the interplay between them, is there really was a necessity in relation to let's just talk about public spaces as public spaces, regardless of what type of public space it is. And the involvement of the police service wasn't as extensive as you might think it was. We were sent a draft in relation to, would you consider this list of activities is something that in policing you would be concerned about, and as an Edmontonian would you be concerned about? And we provided feedback on those are definitely some of the behaviors that we are seeing and our members are interacting with in public spaces, and provided insight in relation to that. There was no, do you think this is too much for the police? Would you enforce this bylaw? It's a bylaw like all the other bylaws that we have in the city of Edmonton. The primary execution of bylaw clauses in the city of Edmonton really does fall into the peace officer category. We do utilize it when we are in public spaces, but making all of this one bylaw will really provide clarity for everybody and the difference between the different spaces was becoming confusing, not only for peace officers, police officers, for justice adjudicators who are getting tickets under one bylaw when it happened in a different space. So it really was cleaning up a lot of the legislation around public spaces. And we were, like many stakeholders, we were included in, here's a list of behaviors. Would you agree these are concerning for you as a police service that we should maybe address in the bylaw? And then we provided our feedback.
Oh, can I have a follow-up to that for you? You know, there with, for instance, like public drug use, that's one of the things that are in there. We already have a criminal code that's illegal, like to possess like certain amounts, right? So, but my impression from some of the city documents is that there's a thinking that if we have this other tool, like a only $25 fine for using drugs in public instead of laying a criminal charge, that could maybe be less punitive or something, a way for maybe if you don't want to have an officer like actually arrest someone for using, there's an option. Is that like an element? Does that help with like being able to deal with some public safety issues around like drug use or maybe misbehavior kind of on transit and spaces like that?
Okay, you want to take that, Chief?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head that we already have a criminal code. So, I mean, I think the whole thing about officer discretion is always going to be used in these cases, but being able to have options on how you can utilize and to do that isn't necessarily a bad thing, depending on what they are. So, you know, as Derek's articulated, you know, lawful placement is one thing, how you deal with it. I think we can use our past here to show why different mechanisms are used. As you can't always, you don't want to take somebody that's really, really vulnerable and hasn't committed a criminal offense and use the criminal code to put them into the system. But we do need, and this is why we support the Compassionate Intervention Act, is that mechanism to get the individual some help. Not sure a fine is going to help that, to be quite honest with you, but it is another avenue of just having the conversation.